It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story.
Will you give the money back, Prime Minister?
Not payback time yet for the Prime Minister as Rishi Sunak goes on the attack over the racism row provoked by a multi-million-pound Tory donor.
I'm pleased that the gentleman is supporting a party that represents one of the most diverse governments in this country's history.
Diane Abbott, who businessman Frank Hester said should be shot, tries 46 times to respond and accuses the Speaker of failing to act in the interests of democracy. As the government prepares to publish a new definition of extremism, we speak to those who could be caught by it from across the political spectrum. The government here moves to block a proposed foreign takeover of the Telegraph as TikTok faces being banned in the US if it doesn't distance itself from China. Animals tortured for bragging rights. The children, some still at primary school, using catapults to kill wildlife and then posting the pictures online. Branching out, how giant sequoias in the UK now outnumber those in California by 6 to 1. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in the press preview from 10:30 right through till midnight. Hello there, a very good evening. The Prime Minister has resisted calls to repay over £10 million in donations to the Conservative Party from a donor he condemned as making racist and wrong comments about a black female MP. Businessman Frank Hester said Diane Abbott made him, in his words, want to hate all black women and said that she should be shot. Diane Abbott tried to speak in the Commons 46 times today but was not called by the Speaker. She later revealed that, had she been called, she would have asked the Prime Minister to consider the impact of his response on a black child wanting to enter politics. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
A Prime Minister having a bad week that's about to get worse.
Will you give the money back, Prime Minister?
Dogged by this row since Monday, the Prime Minister took a day to condemn offensive remarks from his biggest donor about former Labour MP Diane Abbott as racist. His party divided and increasingly despairing at his leadership.
Is the Prime Minister proud to be bankrolled by someone using racist and misogynist language when he says the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women?
The comments were wrong, they were racist. He has rightly apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted.
Rishi Sunak eager to forgive, but the opposition not willing to forget.
What racist, woman-hating threat of violence would he have to make before the Prime Minister plucked up the courage to hand back the £10 million that he's taken from him?
As I said, the gentleman apologised genuinely for his comments, and that remorse should be accepted.
Later, the Prime Minister went further still, suggesting he's happy to have Mr Hester's support.
Will he reimburse him, yes or no?
No, Mr Speaker, and I'm pleased that the gentleman is supporting a party that represents one of the most diverse governments in this country's history.
The woman at the heart of this story tried and tried and tried to have her say in the Commons, rising 46 times through PMQs, trying to get her own question. But not picked by Speaker Lindsay Hoyle. She's accused him of failing democracy. She did get a visit from her former party leader. Miss Abbott said she asked to have the Labour whip restored. But witnesses tell me he simply dodged the question.
It's a time for family. It's a time for friends.
Frank Hester is the Conservative Party's biggest ever donor. He's given £10 million to the Tories in the last year, but the party he's funded is now deeply divided about his offensive comments. Minutes after Rishi Sunak refused to hand back Mr Hester's cash, the Scottish Conservatives broke with their leader, releasing a statement demanding the party carefully review the donations. And even loyal MPs are only offering the faintest praise for the PM.
Do you really, genuinely, in your heart of heart, think that there's a guy who can turn around a 26-point poll deficit?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's got far better at PMQs in recent weeks.
And not willing to repeat the Prime Minister's own words.
Do you think Frank Hester's remorse should be accepted?
I think I don't know enough about the issue personally, but in the sense that, in the sense I don't know the context of it, but what he said was racist and what he said was wrong.
I've just come from talking to lots of Tory MPs. One said that the state of the Conservative Party was a bin fire, and most others seem to agree with that assessment. They are worried about the performance of the Prime Minister. He's got nothing left in the tank, said one person Rishi Sunak appointed to his cabinet. But they just don't agree on what to do next. It's 12 days since Rishi Sunak stood in Downing Street and condemned extremism. Tomorrow, a controversial new strategy to tackle it. But the Prime Minister has been learning the hard way that where you draw the line and what to do when it's crossed is far from easy.
And Sam joins us now from Downing Street. So, Sam, a difficult day then for the Prime Minister. But will this row have any lasting impact, do you think?
Well, look, Jonathan, I think there is a real concern in the building behind me that they are losing a sizable minority of the Conservative Party, their support and their confidence, and there is a feeling that something needs to be done. Today was incredibly important. Today was the first time that we had seen Rishi Sunak since Friday, and since then it had become clear that the budget with a multi-billion-pound spend on tax cuts hadn't landed well, the defection of the former vice chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, and then we were embroiled in a race row involving the Conservative Party's biggest donors. And there is a fear amongst Tory MPs that everything that the Prime Minister's touching at the moment just gets a bit worse, and they are unsure what to do with it. Now, there is a conversation amongst more Tory MPs than you would expect about whether or not the answer to this is to actually bring forward the date of a general election. You hear all sorts of arguments about why that might be the case in private, because things could only get worse, because the economy may not improve, because people are coming off fixed rate mortgages, because over the summer you might get small boat numbers increasing. You hear extraordinary claims from Tory MPs, including this one, Jonathan, from a minister who said to me that they are worried that there might be peace in the Middle East, and that might help Labour because they're currently suffering because of what's going on in Gaza, and that's severing the relationship between their traditional Muslim vote and that party. Extraordinary comment, because we're in extraordinary times. Can Number 10 actually do what it intends and put a lid on that talk of an early election? Will Rishi Sunak come out cleanly in the next few days and rule out a May election? That, I think, is what they're discussing. But will it be enough even if he does it? We'll have to wait and see.
We will. Sam in Downing Street, thank you. Well, as Sam mentioned in his report, the government is due to publish its updated definition of extremism tomorrow, saying it will help crack down on groups that undermine British values and democracy. But a coalition of Muslim organisations has told Sky News the move will vilify the wrong people and risk more division. In a moment, we'll look at data which suggests a surge in activity from far-right groups. But first, here's our home editor, Jason Farrell.
A protest in Birmingham, organised by Shakil Afsar, a vocal activist.
It will be free from the river to the sea.
But will his views and actions fall foul of the new definition of extremism?
This is only being passed to silence us and to put a zip on our mouth and say what you are saying is not acceptable, it won't be entertained. And that's wrong. This is not the democratic country that I grew up in. You could take a walk down the streets in many areas and every single thing that we have said and done is agreed by many, many thousands of British citizens.
He made headlines 5 years ago when a protest exclusion zone was set up around a Birmingham primary school after Shakil led a campaign against inclusion of LGBT literature. He's re-emerged organising pro-Palestinian marches.
Rishi Sunak, you are most definitely a waste man.
Shakil says he doesn't support what Hamas did on October the 7th, but his views and actions might still be considered extremist. And this chant, for example, anti-Semitic.
Surely, do the Palestinians not have a right to arm themselves and stop this tyranny and this genocide that is happening?
A lot of people say, when you chant from the river to the sea, you're saying, stop that genocide over there, but let's annihilate another population over here.
I believe that the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance movement has a right to defend themselves.
But does that mean...
and arm themselves to defend themselves as per international law.
Up to what? Up to which geographical location?
Well,
between the river and the sea?
Up to between the river and the sea.
So therefore, where do the Israelis live? Where do
And
the Israelis live? That's the main
I'm going to
point.
answer the question.
Okay.
Where the Israelis live is from the river to the sea in a democratic country where they all live peacefully.
Michael Gove says pro-Palestinian events have been organised by extremist groups, and it will be one of the challenges of this definition to decide who falls under it.
This definition does not ban extremism. What it bans is the government giving money or platforms to extremists. I think that's very important to make that distinction. You can still have freedom of thought on this basis, but I think what's quite clear is that we don't want extremist groups to be empowered by government. We want them as far away in the margins of life as possible.
Abdullah represents one group which fears it will be deemed extremist, called MEND. They oppose the government's anti-radicalisation programme and accuse them of Islamophobia. They also help train institutions about Islamophobia.
People who engage with the Muslim community, whether it be in hospitals or the police or any other organisations, universities, things like this, they reach out to us saying, listen, you have some really good material, we'd like you to kind of train our staff, with, to talk to us about these issues.
Do you think you'll still be allowed to train the police or medical staff in Islamophobia if you're deemed to be extremist?
I think it's an old tactic, really, that if someone is against you, then you just put this label on them and then you don't have to engage with them.
The government says it's trying to identify all forms of extremism, including the far right. But Muslim groups fear this will disproportionately affect them. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, as Jason mentioned there, the government strategy on extremism is, they say, designed to tackle all forms of extremism, including that from far-right groups. In the last year, there's been a 13-fold rise in the number of anti-migrant protests, according to exclusive statistics from Hope Not Hate. And anti-migrant protesters in Scampton, Lincolnshire, say their message has been muddied by far-right protesters who have joined them at the location. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has more.
This is a very local protest. The traffic thunders by RAF Scampton. People here have been campaigning for a year to stop the Home Office turning it into accommodation for 2,000 asylum seekers.
A year in now, pretty permanent setup, isn't it?
Yes.
The locals, like Sarah, had to contend with another group turning up to hijack their cause. Outsiders, far-right nationalists.
The main group were sort of pretty far-right, and then there were people there that maybe weren't quite as aware of the situation that were supporting them.
Fights broke out and the police were called out regularly. Sarah says she and her husband were assaulted by men wearing balaclavas. Our analysis of new figures from advocacy group Hope Not Hate, shared exclusively with Sky News, shows how protests like these are becoming a new battleground for the far right.
There's been this big surge in anti-migrant protests like this one over the last year, but that contains multitudes. It can be legitimate political protests. There's also fears that it can be hijacked by right-wing groups.
The demonstration in RAF Scampton is just one of many across the UK. There are 275 anti-migrant events in 2023. 159 of those were visits, where people try and gain access to hotels where migrants are being held. 116 were demonstrations, a 13-fold increase on the year before. And that may reflect a rise in confidence on the hard right, perhaps because many of the themes they champion are becoming mainstream. If this idea of invasion sounds familiar, well, you may have heard it somewhere else before.
The British people deserve to know which party is serious about stopping the invasion on our southern coast.
The language of the far right swilling around the web, now making its way to Westminster, according to political scientists.
I don't think politicians anymore are, if you like, insulated from the language and some of the behaviour of the far right. I think they pick it up on social media, and they're willing to use some of the words that those groups, tend to bandy about, quite easily.
The question is what all that means in an election year, with the Conservative Party facing pressure from further right. National questions. But RAF Scampton is a reminder that all politics, even on the far right, is local. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Lincolnshire.
Well, the toxic public mood which has thrust extremism onto the political agenda is perhaps being felt most keenly inside Westminster itself, with an intensification of abuse against MPs for their religion or political views. Official records show that the Coventry MP, Zara Sultana, has received more online threats than any other MP. Our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, has followed her in her constituency and witnessed what life is like for a politician used to always looking over her shoulder.
Zara Sultana.
Recording the time and the location on a constituency visit, this is one of the many security precautions this Labour MP has to take before every single event. This year, she's found out that she's received the most threats and serious abuse of any MP online, 68% more than the next most targeted MP. She says a notable uptick since speaking up about the rights of the Palestinian people.
What do you get online? I'll start off with someone who said, you need to be deported, you send that to Palestine, they are low on targets. I'm just going to speak briefly.
MPs' duties have become more risky for members under threat. In the back of minds are the 2 MPs killed in their constituencies. House conventions have also been upended by safety concerns. Parliamentary authorities know safety is fundamental to democracy and offer a number of security measures for members. Door knocking can be one of the most exposing moments for an MP.
Let's try our luck.
For Zara, she says the majority of her abuse, 54%, has been categorised as Islamophobic.
I think the Prime Minister has used his platform to whip up fear, hate and Islamophobia, and that is incredibly dangerous.
The Prime Minister disputes this, saying he has called out Islamists and the far right, but expressed concern about protests like this one. Zara says it's vital she attends these demonstrations to represent her constituents and community.
The more you're in the public sphere, it feels like the more you're being attacked.
It weighs heavily. It's difficult, but I remind myself why I got involved in politics in the first place, and I'm reminded about all of these values that I have, that I share with millions of other people across the country.
Zara says she will now increase her security measures. For some MPs, though, the risks are still too high, and said they have had no choice but to step down before the next general election. Serena Barker-Singh, Sky News.
It's been a page-turning saga in media and political circles for months, the future of the Telegraph newspapers. An Abu Dhabi-led takeover bid came to a head today and appears to have been effectively killed by a government move to stop foreign states from owning British newspapers. Redbird IMI, backed by Manchester City owner Sheikh Mansour, said that they were extremely disappointed and would now evaluate their next steps. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
The Telegraph is one of our oldest daily newspapers and most influential modern media brands. But a takeover backed by the Abu Dhabi royal family threatened to put the voice of conservative Britain in the hands not just of a foreign owner, but a foreign state, a move the government will now block.
That His Majesty's government is committed to bringing forward an amendment to this bill at third reading, which prevents foreign state ownership of newspapers.
The fate of the Telegraph titles and the weekly Spectator magazine has been in question since they were bought for £600 million by Redbird IMI, a joint venture 25% owned by American Redbird Capital, fronted by former CNN executive Jeff Zucker, and International Media Investments, whose 75% stake is a personal investment by Sheikh Mansour, Deputy Prime Minister of the UAE and a member of the Abu Dhabi ruling family. The deal has been stalled since Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser referred it to regulators. Redbird will now have to reduce Sheikh Mansour's stake or walk away. His billions have been welcome elsewhere, transforming Manchester City's fortunes, and the UAE is committed to invest £10 billion in British business and infrastructure. But a former Telegraph editor says newspapers are different.
They are just trying to get in, and in order to exercise power in other ways in our society and have more influence with government and so on. And once that's done, it's very hard to undo. And, you know, we wouldn't nobody in Britain, I think, or almost no one, will want nationalised newspapers by the British government. So why on earth would you want them by, a foreign government?
Government intervention comes after months of campaigning from Conservative MPs and the Telegraph newsroom, all with their own stake in the outcome.
The battle for the Telegraph is a question of principle and politics. Critics, including in its own pages, argue it's simply wrong for a foreign state, even by association, to have a stake in a British newspaper. But this is the Telegraph. What's written in here will have unique influence in the Conservatives, a party in government for now, but increasingly divided as it prepares for an election. It's forecast to lose.
That influence means there'll be no shortage of alternative bidders. Rupert Murdoch, whose News UK owns The Times and The Sun, is a potential buyer, along with Lord Rothermere, owner of the Daily Mail titles, and Sir Paul Marshall, proprietor of the start-up channel GB News.
It means a new kind of sales process will have to begin. Who carries out that sales process? Will it be Mr. Zucker? Will it be the Barclay family? When the sales process was going full tilt in the autumn of last year, there were 22 suitors for The Spectator.
Almost 170 years after it first appeared on newsstands, how this edition of the Telegraph story ends remains unclear. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Now, TikTok may seem the polar opposite of the Telegraph, beloved of teens and the epitome of the digital information age. But today, it too faced a crackdown by government, this time in the United States. The House of Representatives passed a bill which would force the company to cut its links with its Chinese parent company or face the threat of a ban. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has more.
We are in a cold war with China.
This is not a ban on TikTok.
Today, we take a stand against the Chinese Communist Party and their efforts to turn content creators in America into foot soldiers.
The moment TikTok was banned in America, well, not quite, but a step closer for sure. TikTok, after the debate,
this is a 15-minute vote.
The vote. And it was decisive. By a margin of 352 to 65, they voted to compel TikTok to cut all ties from its parent company ByteDance, or be pulled from the US app stores in 6 months. It's certainly creating some unusual alliances, from the most liberal politicians to those very much on the right, grouped together but in separate camps, those calling for what could effectively amount to a ban and those defending the company. It is a real mashup.
I'm a little upset.
It's caused a storm on TikTok, of course.
The app that I rely on to keep my business alive.
Because for many, it's much more than a time waster.
Because I'm going to keep making a lot of noise about how I want to keep TikTok, not as a content creator, but also as a business owner and as a young American.
In Beijing, with a hint of hypocrisy, given that American social media companies are banned there, the Foreign Ministry spokesman was predictably unimpressed, saying there is no evidence of national security risks, that it smacks of hegemony, and that it'll backfire. China is a bipartisan bogeyman for America, hence the unusual alliances. But hints of misunderstanding too. ByteDance is a private company and has no Chinese Communist Party stake or board member.
U.S. lawmakers broadly have two types of concerns. One is around data privacy and the personal data that TikTok possesses and collects on its users, and possible misuses of that data, and concerns that China, in a non-transparent way, could manipulate the algorithm to promote its political agenda. I think this concern is more well-founded than the data privacy concern, but I think the issue is these concerns are far broader than TikTok.
The discourse has hints of xenophobia as well. Here's the boss of TikTok on Capitol Hill earlier this year.
Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
And contradiction. The Biden 2024 campaign is on TikTok, but he says he would sign the bill into law. No surprise then that Donald Trump is against it. There is little chance of ByteDance and TikTok separating, but a high chance of political delay and legal challenges. Americans will be scrolling for some time yet. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
The Foreign Office says 150 tonnes of UK aid has been delivered to Gaza, with a UK field hospital set to arrive this week. Sky News understands that the RAF has decided not to carry out airdrops because of the risk they pose to people on the ground. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says efforts are being made to secure a maritime corridor to get critical aid into Gaza.
There's movement, and it's positive, but it remains insufficient. Israel still needs to open as many access points as possible and keep them open to make sure that things are flowing in a sustainable way.
The UK economy grew by 0.2% in January, according to the Office for National Statistics. The growth was put down to strong retail sales, with consumers making the most of the sales post-Christmas. It indicates that the economy could be turning a corner after dipping into a technical recession at the end of last year. And a polio survivor who lived inside an iron lung for 70 years has died at the age of 78. Paul Alexander, known as Polio Paul, was 6 years old when he contracted polio and was left paralysed from the neck down and unable to breathe independently. Despite his condition, Mr. Alexander would go on to earn a law degree and work as an attorney. Now, it's a shocking emerging trend involving young people, some of them still at primary school. Children filming themselves using catapults to kill and torture animals and then sharing footage of their kills in WhatsApp groups. A warning: this report by our correspondent Amelia Harper contains some distressing images.
Darkness has fallen. This, the setting for an execution. A bird singled out, about to be shot by children. The impact of the fall minor compared to the incoming kick. And this is the weapon of choice, a catapult. The victim this time, a squirrel. Sky News has uncovered a UK-wide network of animal shooting and torture carried out by children using catapults. Filming and photographing their kills, this material is shared on WhatsApp against their terms of use. An investigation has uncovered 11 catapult groups on the app with nearly 500 members like this one.
We're seeing more and more injured animals being reported to us that have been hit by a catapult. You can go and buy a catapult very easily and use it to target animals, which is illegal, and offences will be committed.
And injured animals end up here. The Swan Sanctuary, which rescues waterfowl, has 20 birds, all with catapult injuries in their hospital pens.
Most of the injuries are head injuries, neck injuries, pure kill shots. They're there to try and kill these animals. Fractures to the facial areas, eyes exploding, windpipes bursting. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've gone.
Causing unnecessary suffering to an animal is illegal. But when it comes to catapults, there's a gap in the law. People can buy them, carry them, and here they're being used to kill. The Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 is the relevant legislation protecting wildlife in England and Wales, but catapults aren't covered anywhere under those laws. Henry Smith is part of a group of MPs working to lift animal welfare standards.
Government and Parliament should look to legislate in terms of the sale of catapults, and also for those who use catapults as a weapon to inflict injury and suffering, that there is a criminal sanction to that.
Big Canadian goose, dead as a dodo.
Documented on WhatsApp, this rabbit just another victim of an emerging trend, where catapults are used by children to kill. Calls have been made to tighten the laws. The question is, will it stop them? Amelia Harper, Sky News.
Just horrific. Some happier news, though, to end the bulletin. When you think of giant redwoods, you might think of lush Californian forests. But a new study has found that the world's largest trees are flourishing in the UK and now outnumber their counterparts in the United States. The trees, known here as sequoias, were first brought to Britain about 160 years ago and could end up being the saviour of the species. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
The giant sequoia, the world's largest tree.
Originally from California, but now it seems perfectly at home in Britain. Scientists have counted up to 500,000 around the country. That's 6 times as many as there are left in the forests of the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the US, they're threatened by drought and extreme wildfires. Here, the conditions are just right, even though our climate is so different.
UK and California, you'd think 2 completely different climates.
Well, you would do, but remember California maybe 300 years ago, quite a different environment than it is now. Much cooler, much wetter, much more humid. And that's what we've got here. We have those conditions here in the UK.
Which is why they're doing so well here.
It's one reason why they're doing so well. I think the other reason is that taking them out of their native range means that the competition and pests are no longer problematic for the species.
The tallest sequoia, or giant redwood, that the researchers found was just under 55 metres, far smaller than the 80-metre giants in the US. But British specimens are growing around 70 centimetres a year, absorbing 160 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's twice the amount of a native oak tree.
The first sequoias were planted in Britain a little under 200 years ago, but that makes them mere babies compared to their Californian cousins. There, the giants are up to 3,000 years old, with trunks so wide they've been tunnelled out to drive a car through.
You can see the top just about from this bit.
It's unlikely that the British sequoias will grow that big, but they could prove a vital safety net for the species. Threatened with extinction in California, seeds from British trees that were brought here by the Victorians could one day be transplanted back across the Atlantic, saving the majestic giants of the forest. Thomas Moore, Sky News at Wakehurst Gardens in Sussex.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we're going to take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Joining me tonight, Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Telegraph's Deputy Comment Editor, Annabelle Denham. And among the stories we'll be discussing is this on the front of the Telegraph. Its headline, Gove to identify Muslim groups as extremists. We'll be right back after this short break. Hello again, you're watching Sky News. We've got the press preview for you in a moment. Take your first look at tomorrow's front pages. But first, our top stories tonight. The Prime Minister has refused to hand back £10 million from a Tory donor who made racist remarks about Diane Abbott, saying his apology should be accepted. Ahead of the government's new definition of extremism tomorrow, a coalition of Muslim groups has warned it could vilify the wrong people. And the government will change the law to ban foreign powers from owning British media organisations following concerns about a bid by an Abu Dhabi-backed investment group for Telegraph newspapers. So, time for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages. We're going to check out the headlines tonight with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabelle Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Very good evening. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages for you. Why don't we start with The Guardian? Diane Abbott has accused the Tories of aiming to play the race card and says Tory donor Frank Hester's comments left her upset but not surprised. Meanwhile, The Eye claims 21% of the Tories' election war chest comes from Frank Hester as the party's reliance on the donor is revealed. Here's the FT hearing that the American government held secret talks with its Iranian counterparts earlier this year, all in an attempt to get them to use their influence to stop Houthi rebel attacks in the Red Sea. The Telegraph reports that the government will identify Muslim groups as extremists if they're found to be inciting hatred, with the publishing of a new definition of non-violent extremism expected. Plans for migrant flights to Rwanda are in a good place, according to the front of tomorrow's Daily Express, while the front of tomorrow's Daily Mail says Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has asked for a bigger budget to match the threat posed by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Cancer deaths in middle-aged adults have fallen by a third thanks to breakthroughs in treatment. That's on the front of The Times tomorrow. While the Metro reports that following testimony from Ed Sheeran's manager, a family of ticket touts has been convicted of scamming more than £6 million out of concert goers. And a billionaire is reportedly looking to build an exact replica of the Titanic. That's on the front of the Daily Star. And don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen throughout the programme. Take a look at tomorrow's front pages while we discuss them. And to do just that, I'm joined tonight by Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. Hopefully, we're going to talk about the Titanic a bit later. Fascinating, that. But right now, let's start with the front of The Guardian. Annabelle, why don't you kick things off? Diane Abbott has been writing for the paper.
She has. She's written a comment piece for The Guardian. This, of course, is following the comments made by Tory donor Frank Hester, which emerged at the start of the week, remarks which were absolutely appalling, which the Conservative Party was, well, the Conservative government was too slow, in my view at least, to unequivocally condemn and describe as racist and sexist, which quite clearly they were. Very fiery PM's cues today between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, and Diane Abbott, who stood up, I think, 47 times in the chamber, but didn't have an opportunity to speak. So a lot of heat now on the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and perhaps from that frustration has felt the need to put some words down in The Guardian to set her perspective on this controversy this week, and in doing so she has accused the Conservatives of aiming to play the race card in the next general election, saying that the abuse that she received from this Tory donor epitomised the approach that she thinks that the Tories will be taking. I think there are going to be two questions on most people's minds now. The first is whether Diane Abbott will have the whip restored after the abuse that she has received this week, and after PM's cues, Keir Starmer went over to her. They had a conversation in which she mentioned that if there was anything he could do to help, then that would be it. And the second is whether the Tories will return the £10 million that they have received from this donor, and they have suggested, at least until this point, that they will not. One wonders, whether they might have spent some of this money, allocated some of this money. However, I do wonder whether they'll find themselves under so much pressure that eventually they buckle.
Yeah, so a bad day for Rishi Sunak, Kevin. The story isn't going away. And what do you think the answers are to those questions?
I don't think they will give the money back. I think they should. Remember, Labour gave back £1 million in Tony Blair era to Bernie Ecclestone after it was found out the Formula One magnate had held talks with Labour over getting a delay in an advertising ban on Formula One. He got it, and they'd given £1 million. They claimed there were no links, but they were. And this money's clearly tainted. Andy Street, the Tory mayor of the West Midlands, said it should be given back. The Conservatives in Scotland have said that. Alistair Burt, a former Foreign Office Minister, has said it. But I suppose they want to hang on to the loot. That's what they want to do, and it kind of compromised them yesterday when they were so slow in just saying it was racist and sexist. If somebody is focusing on a black woman, and there we are, the racism and the sexism are there in the phrase black woman. It makes me want to hate all black women. It was quite clear. And number 10, I really felt sorry for the official spokesman who was just given a pathetic script to read, and then you had a couple of ministers, Mel Stride working pensions. You had was it Graham Stewart, the energy minister, trying to pretend it wasn't racist. It was just, oh God, give me strength. We had this all with 30p Lee Anderson over the mayor of London.
A long time, doesn't it, to call these things out? And
the obvious.
Quickly, before we move on, what about the Lindsay Hoyle issue? You mentioned it there. What was that all about, do you think?
I suspect that he was nervous about taking action one way or the other. I think he probably felt that he was damned if he did and he was damned if he didn't. And generally in those scenarios, you're better off not doing anything and perhaps try and defend it later. But it's, the spotlight is back on the Speaker of the House of Commons after, he came under a lot of criticism for his handling of the motion brought forward by the SNP to do with a Gaza ceasefire vote. And I just wonder whether questions will again be asked over his judgment.
I think it was inexplicable.
Integrity.
She had a guardian piece. She has a go at the Labour Party because emails in the Corbyn era showed some staff were being incredibly critical of her, very abusive. But she does criticise Lindsay Hoyle. But I think most MPs in the Commons chamber and the country wanted to hear what she had to say.
Well, in view of the fact that they were debating the abuse that she had faced. But I think we do need to remember that Diane Abbott did lose the Labour whip last year after writing a letter to the Observer newspaper in which she suggested that Jewish people could not be subjected to racism, but were subjected to prejudice in the same way that people with ginger hair might be.
She apologised.
Extremely offensive.
Very offensive, absolutely.
And
she apologised immediately. That was 11 months ago. Keir Starmer says he wants to speed up justice. Well, what about in the Labour Party?
Why does it take a year for that? Listen, we're going to move on because
the word is she's going to get the whip back
after 11 o'clock because it is all fascinating. But I do want to get on to the front of the Telegraph. Tomorrow we're expecting this new definition of extremism. Kevin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
to identify groups as extremists.
Yeah, Michael Gove, the levelling up secretary, is going to produce it. Now, it does seem, because it comes on from the Frank Hester story. You say somebody should be shot and you give £10 million to the Tory party, you're not branded an extremist. If you go on a march and you say an MP should be shot, I've no doubt Michael Gove would want the police to immediately arrest that person, have them prosecuted and probably locked up. Now, so there's a huge contradiction now in the official position of the government. The worry with what Gove is doing now, and yes, as the Telegraph points out, there's been a 6-fold increase in anti-Semitic incidents, 4-fold increase in anti-Muslim hatred. This is all, the way it's in the Telegraph, all about Muslims. It's not about the far right, it's not about other groups. A whole series of former Conservative Home Secretaries expressed concern. Just focusing on Muslims will divide people. And there's a terrible whiff of party politicking around this, rather than looking at public safety and the public good.
OK, Annabelle?
Well, I think you need to bear in mind where the majority of the threat is coming from, and that is from Islamic fundamentalists. If you look at the caseload, the counterterrorism caseload, the majority of it is coming from that source. So, not to suggest that the far right is not also a threat.
It's the second biggest terrorist threat in the UK.
Isn't the same degree of threat, but I think that there is a difference in terms of the scale of the threat from those two groups. However, of course, the question is whether we needed to have a redefinition of extremism in Britain today. Clearly, the government felt that that was necessary, but that raises all sorts of secondary concerns over freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, about infringing on the civil liberties of the majority in order to clamp down on a small majority in Britain today. And you mentioned the police taking action. What we need to ask, having seen the police stand by as protesters on pro-Palestine marches were chanting anti-Semitic slogans and not taking action, the question is whether this toughening up or redefinition of extremism is actually going to make any difference.
OK, great. If you just say you were rude, you'll be all right. I was going to finish. Prime Minister, I'll say, but just say you were rude and that's it. You'll be OK. You give a few quid and off you go. Yeah. OK, listen, well, just want to squeeze this in before the break. Front of the Daily Mail, Grant Shapps backing spending 3% on our defence budget. We already spend quite a lot on our defence budget, don't we?
Well, we do meet the NATO requirement of 2% of GDP on defence spending, but I think Grant Shapps is right when he said this a few weeks ago, that we live in an increasingly dangerous world at the moment. The Foreign Secretary has also expressed similar concerns about lights flashing red on the dashboard. We've got the threat from China, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got the threat from Russia, we've got conflict in the Middle East.
Kevin, quick thought on this? It's going to be another 20 billion quid. Where's he going to get that? Where's he going to come from? Well, maybe with a £46 billion cut in national insurance. I mean, look, he's just making it up as he goes along. But it shows a big split in the government when you have a defence secretary days after a budget didn't increase defence spending.
He did say it was going to come, though, didn't he? Eventually, but
eventually, yeah.
All right, listen, great. Sorry to rush you at the end there. We'll speak again in a moment when we look at this story from the Metro, how Ed Sheeran took on the ticket touts and won. Don't go away.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Well, the
plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You get your political agenda.
No, it's honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. we take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem.
What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Hello again, welcome back to the press preview. Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham still with me in the studio. Kevin, why don't you tell us about Ed Sheeran? Interesting front page story, this, but one that you want to read, isn't it?
It is, and it's he and his manager helping bust a ticket scam. A family of super touts ripped off music fans for $6.5 million in less than 3 years. What they would do is use loads of different email addresses and names to buy tickets and then sell them on at inflated prices at places like Viagogo. Now, I hate touts. I absolutely hate them. Some people might think they're an efficient use of a free market. I'm not suggesting who might, but some people will.
We are still struggling as a nation, aren't we, to get a hold on this sort of thing. And
Yes.
when you go to a concert, you know that you're going to get in. You've got the valid ticket. That everyone else has got a valid ticket as well.
Well,
you think it'd be quite simple.
The Competition and Markets Authority have tried to clamp down on ticket touts in the past, but clearly it's an ongoing problem. Now, I will do my best to defend them, sort of. The world needs middlemen. That's what they act of.
And women.
And women. We see them in all industries. Clearly, when it comes to tickets to an Ed Sheeran show, you are always going to have demand outstrip supply, and ticket touts are a way of dealing with that. The alternative to being ripped off by a tout is not that you get necessarily a ticket at a decent price, but rather that it finds its way into a secondary market some other way. However, in this instance, it was quite clearly a scam. And the volume of tickets they bought, 47,000. So they were certainly committed to it.
I think we've just got to fight them all the way. It's very hard to check photo ID against a ticket when you get 20, 30,000 people turning up around the same time to get in somewhere.
Yeah, it is difficult, but that's that's
it's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
If you can't use a ticket, you got to resell it to the retailer, and then they sell it back.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been especially popular, Ed Sheeran, so perhaps this sets him on the path to redemption.
He's hugely popular. His
music's very popular, but
controversial.
the controversy with neighbours and...
Listen, let's finish. Let's just finish on this on the front of the Daily Star, because I do think it's... I lived in Australia, and about 10 years ago, this guy, Clive Palmer, the billionaire, had this idea of building a replica Titanic. I think he was going to get the Chinese to build it. The idea sank. But it looks like it's been resurrected.
Yeah, it's the worst brand ever, isn't it? I mean, we're going to sell one-way tickets. And the story have a different ending.
Those ticket touts won't have much luck, will they? Trying to resell those tickets on the Titanic.
It didn't have enough lifeboats, so you can't actually build an exact replica.
Exactly.
You wouldn't get a safety certificate.
No, there'd have to be all sorts of modifications to the original.
But would you really want to say, I'm going on the Titanic?
No, well, this is the thing. I think, especially if you were going with your family, I think you'd get on with your kids and they'd say, Mum, this is so boring, and they'd want to be on the Disney cruise with the slides.
I've got a sinking feeling about this story.
All right, well, listen, we're going to rearrange the deck chairs in the studio, and we shall speak to you again in a few minutes' time. Right now, we're going to take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
No icebergs in sight, but the rest of the week will stay unsettled with localised flooding, but southwesterly winds will make it very mild. Now, there will be quite a windy start tomorrow with long rain from the north of Ireland across to the Scottish border region and a scattering of locally heavy showers for southwestern Britain and the rest of Ireland. Central Scotland will turn wet during the morning, while northern England, Northern Ireland and the north of Ireland will see rain giving way to showers, some heavy. Southern Scotland will stay wet. Elsewhere, the far north, the Midlands and South East England look mostly fine, but central and southern parts of Ireland, Wales and the West Country will see blustery showers. It's going to be very mild, but windy as well for most. Showers will extend across all southern Britain later, while Northern Ireland and the north of Ireland will see showers merging to give some more general rain. There'll be little change elsewhere, and Britain will see widespread showers or longer spells of rain on Friday, while Ireland and Northern Ireland look like drying up.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.